Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Proper Variant and this is Victoria 3's DevDare number 53. Today we'll talk about characters, and it is so nice that we're finally back here when it comes to the DevDares, because there's a lot to be talked about. There are so many open questions ultimately, right, where we talked about a topic and then it was never revisited, but we know from the back or basically of our mind that there will be some reworked mechanics there. Now, characters have always been mentioned. We talked about them related to, for example, interest groups, to country leaderships. We know from, for example, the AARs that characters play into the fact, if you happen to be an autocracy, they play into the fact how legitimate your government is. There clearly is a lot of involvement here, and yet we know so very little. So I'm very excited to be back with this. I do hope that sooner rather than later we will see some more actually moving content for Victoria 3, some streams or something, something of this sort. I can tell you, of course, PDXCon is happening in September. I will be there, I will be playing Victoria 3 there, and I will return and tell you everything unless Paradox manages to sort of like screw me down and never let me go again, because I will, of course, try to detail or get all the details of my playtime there. I'm very excited for that. Let's do this Dev Diary first, and before we even do the Dev Diary, I'm going to spoil it for you, that next week's Dev Diary will be Martin Anwart, so the game director, actually unveiling the revisions to the trade mechanics since we last covered them. Trade is such a huge topic, it got reworked significantly, and I'm very excited that finally we are going to see where that mechanic has gone in full. Now, welcome back. With the traditional Swedish summer vacations over, the Victoria 3 team is back to work, and that means the resumption of Dev Diaries. Today we're going to take a look at characters and their various facets, including leader ideologies, traits, popularity, and more. Here we have the full titles of Ferdinand, I believe the second, technically speaking, von Habsburg, or the Kaiser of Austria. I assume it was basically the second of Austria, right? Anyway, he is the emperor of these lands, and he looks amazing. I gotta tell you, if you actually Google this fella, if you Google Ferdinand II or Ferdinand von Habsburg in general as the Kaiser of Austria, you will find a man, dare I say it, looked actually significantly more ugly than this. This is clearly paid Habsburg propaganda. They paid Paradox to make the character look at least a little bit better than he did historically. But all of that aside, it's just superficial nonsense and jokes anyway. What is happening here in this screen? You can see this looks to me like, hey, what if you make your Kaiser, what if you make the Emperor a general? This was a change that did take place, but that didn't get as big a coverage, I think, as it deserved to. You can make your leaders into generals, and I think that is amazing. Previously, that was ruled out, for example, when we look at the campaign of Emperor Napoleon III against the Germans or in Italy, then you will realize that he campaigned there himself, and the fact that he can actually do that is very nice. Now, he is a ruler and a politician. He is the leader of the Austrian aristocracy, the interest group right there. You can see they have 48.8% of power. He is South German, he is a moderate. So that is what that means. His ideology that he adds to the interest group is moderation, and then we have a popularity. I love that the symbol is so positive. It's like, yeah, thumbs up. And he's hated at -75. That is pretty crazy. He's only 43 years old, and yeah, he is in this situation. Now, he also happens, these are his traits, to be arrogant. He has a psychological affliction as well. I assume some sort of trauma, whatever that might be. And this is a big character. I think it's the biggest screen of this sort that we have seen. We are going to see a bunch more, but what we can see is, basically, I think the most important parts are his role, then what he adds to the interest group, of course his popularity, and then his character traits. I think those are all of the most important parts. Let's take a look at what is written down here. Interest group ideologies, such as liberal for the intelligentsia and jingoist for the armed forces, are for the most part set in stone, outside of some special instances. If you watched the videos on the Japan AAR, then you may already know this, that the Shinto monks, for example, were significantly changed as the decision to introduce Shinto was actually taken, and then this state Shinto forced the group to be entirely different, to be much more devout and much more happy with the monarchy as a whole, right? Not that that stopped the civil war in that AAR, but either way, that is one of the rare cases where the actual interest group trait changes, where the ideology fundamentally is altered. Commonly, that isn't done in this way. Interest groups represent broad class interests rather than the prevailing political zeitgeist. In the rural folks' particularist ideology, for instance, opposes serfdom, debt slavery, and peasant levies, and it's difficult to imagine them changing their stance on such matters. That is a fundamental statement. Basically, if you want to build a society that does not oppose any of these issues, you have to do it with different interest groups. I think, mechanically speaking, this makes perfect sense. If it was any other way, you would never have to work against an opposition. You could always work into them and with them, because ultimately they would grow into liking debt slavery and to grow to like serfdom and so on. you need a steady opposition to make the mechanics interesting, and on a realistic level, certain things just are never changing. You just have to, make these interest groups less attractive, you have to suppress them and such. That is, I think, a very good approach, that the interest groups per se only in edge cases will lose their actual hard-coded ideologies, and otherwise are influenced by the political zeitgeist in the manner via their leaders. Market liberals can appear after researching stock exchange and may well decide that they want to shake up your tightly controlled or agrarian economy. So, this is a leader ideology. This leader ideology is handed out to an interest group that is led by that person, meaning a new character spawns in, they take a look at the code, it says, oh, you research stock exchange, you don't have a law that, makes this easy to, for example, laissez-faire, right? They want laissez-faire, let's say you don't have that, and then there will be a very high chance that this freshly generated character will adopt market liberalism. And this makes it so that the character as a leader is basically altering whether that party will be in the opposition or in the government in that particular political moment at the time. It is very important to point out, and there are no finished numbers here, this is all work in progress, but I have asked the devs and I asked, what is the regular time of rotating out a leader? Like, how often does an interest group change one of these alignments? Sometimes, of course, you might roll a leader that still holds on to the same ideology that the recently disappearing leader, right, that he was holding on. But fundamentally, how often will the political zeitgeist have an opportunity to influence one of the very important standings of the interest groups? And the answer that I got was, and this was stated publicly as well to a degree, Daniel Tollman actually tweaked many of these numbers. Daniel Tollman wrote this dev diary as well. And last we heard, it was basically planned that around roughly 10 years is when the interest group leaders are phased out. They retire, they move on, they take up a different job, maybe they die, maybe they're assassinated, right? But roughly, on an average year or on an average day, you want a 10-year span where that doesn't change. Now, apparently that has been tweaked a bit, and again, nothing here is final, but it has been tweaked, so it's like between 5 and 10 years. No exact numbers, always remember everything is work in progress, but my point ultimately is that let's say it's the year 1840, let's say you're a monarchy, and let's say the intelligentsia picks up market liberal, right? For 5 to 10 years, you have to deal with it. Whether you want to go towards laissez-faire, whether, for example, they oppose agrarianism, but your society is based on that, it could be that the intelligentsia for that time frame is the opposition. They may have been your friends before that, but their leader, their current stream essentially says, but wait a minute, we would like to basically do whatever we want in the economy. Sounds more like, I have to admit, sounds more like the industrialists to begin with, but I hope you know where I'm coming from. After a certain amount of time, either if you changed the law or if you went on and, created a situation where they are not capable of actually standing for anything, let's say, for example, they're marginalized, in that case, they may focus on other laws that, are more important to actually strengthen them rather than laissez-faire, for example. My point is that you have a bit of a variance here. You have variety, you have changes that occur and that make every playthrough different because the political zeitgeist is determined in this way. We talked about it in a different video as well, how easy the code for all of this looked, how simple it looked to basically assign or enable a different ideology for any of the interest group leaders, right? And I think that is very excellent. What we see here is that you can always bet that certain groups have certain fundamental interests, but where they stand on the day-to-day politics, let's say you have slavery, whether they are abolitionists or not, can be different between these playthroughs. Whether you have a leader that goes on and on about, for example, creating a democracy, and with that all of a sudden is against you, or whether you have a leader that says, you know what, we're benefiting from the monarchy, let's keep the monarchy. Those things can change fundamentally how you play the game. And I think it's a very smart approach when it comes to this. But just this was the wider take that we had to present here, because this is such a big topic that we saw in AAR so often. I just wanted to build up on that right there. This leader believes that the invisible hand of the free market should be the guiding force of the nation's economy. Let's say, for example, you're isolated Japan, right? Somebody with a market liberal trade, that could be the death sentence for a corporation of that faction within your government. And with that, all of a sudden, you have to move against them, even if otherwise you're very happy with them. I really like that that is as layered as it is. The ideologies of your interest group leaders, however, do represent the prevailing political zeitgeist within their own section of society. Every character comes with their own personal ideology, determined by a wide variety of factors reflecting the material and political conditions of your nation. I'll list a few examples of these factors. So let's go through this. I already went into it with the AAR examples, but here we got some really nice examples as well. Fascist leaders are more likely to emerge in countries that are paying war reparations after losing war, because it is fundamentally a radicalization of nationalist revanchism, right? So that is what we're seeing right here. Under other circumstances, you will probably not have a fascist leader. You know, for example, if the petite bourgeoisie is very, very happy, then there's no reason to radicalize in any way whatsoever. In that case, you might not ever see it. But, as you can see here, if you lost the Great War, right, or if you lost a war, then you're looking at that situation where fascists may rise up. Radical leaders, so radical here means Republican, Libertarian, that is what that roughly means, are more likely to emerge in absolute monarchies with high turmoil in incorporated states. It makes sense. What does that mean for the player? If you want a playthrough where you keep the monarchy active, you have to do everything that you can to prevent turmoil from happening. That can be via suppression, that can be via making people into loyalists via economic circumstances, right? That is how you avoid the turmoil. If you fail to do that, you may be faced with a very, very powerful faction that isn't just, oh, you know, I want some market liberalization, I want to vote. No, they will also say, I want to get rid of the monarchy. So you either suppress that entirely by making people happy or by literally suppressing them, or you will face a rebellion. And if you face the rebellion after that, you have to go back to the routine of attempting to actually suppress it. Very, very nice. Communist leaders are more likely to emerge in countries with large urban centers and low living standards for the lower strata. I do like this a lot. I would like to see what this looks like in practice for example, Russia, if, you know, they were to see a communist uprising, because obviously Russia in 1917, 1918 was still very much largely a rural nation, which is of course also then the reason for the White Army rising up in as many places as they did, where the loyalty to the Tsar and to the monarchy as a whole was still a given. But of course, they still had the potential for communism and communist revolution is what I mean here. And with that, I really just want to take a good look at that and ask, does that work in the actual nature of this? You know, does this trigger correctly for example, Russia, for anybody that goes through a very terrible time? Because commonly, if I think about it, this might just lead to a radical leader, but then again, I mean, yeah, look at the revolution in Russia. It was a very dirty revolution in the sense where there were a lot of bourgeoisie elements mixed in initially, of course, with the new government compared to, you know, what we then later have, which is the Soviet Union. But both of those then later on folded out. So ultimately, yeah, I mean, maybe it wouldn't even make too much sense if you always get a communist leader in such an extreme rebellion situation like with the Russian Empire. Maybe sometimes it makes sense if it's just a radical, for example. But either way, where I'm coming from here is obviously it does make sense. If you do have urban centers that are very concentrated, if you get that sort of economy and they are poor, they are impoverished, right? Then you might get communists. If you have urban centers but people aren't impoverished because you're taking care of them, you might not get a communist at all. You might be able to rule with the trade unions. That is something that is as non-dynamic as the core ideologies of the interest groups are. It is insanely dynamic. How you can influence whether leaders get generated in a certain way based on the chances that are generated from the actual lives of the people. I love that stuff. Social democrats are less likely to emerge from content interest groups. Angry ideas will turn towards more radical forms of socialism. So, I am not sure about this in the sense where I'm coming from. Social democrats of this movement were obviously via reformism, right? They were the moderate groups already. Should this maybe read are more likely to emerge from content interest groups? Because if you're content, you might go social democrat. You might say, oh, you know, the status quo isn't perfect, but we can work this out. We can make our way towards a better world just by reform. Obviously, it does make sense. If IGs are very angry, if the trade unions have been neglected, if they are poor, they will turn more towards, for example, socialism, towards avant-gardist, right? Vanguardist, I mean, towards whatever else there was. I keep forgetting the socialist ideas, the socialist ideologies of Victoria 3. But where I'm coming from is obviously it does make sense. If they are more content, then we'll just say, we don't really need to do something radical. But if they are very angry, well, radicalism is really the only option. Theocrats are more likely to emerge when your country has a state religion law and the devout interest group is powerful. Makes sense as well, otherwise this influence, this institution of the church might fade away. Market liberals are more likely to emerge in countries with large urban centers and less modern economic laws like traditionalism and mercantilism. This is basically the equivalent to, I think, radical leaders and monarchies, you know, market liberals, and if you have traditionalism or mercantilism is the same concept there. But as you can see, the way leaders, the way characters are meant to exist is as the result of the collective movement and existence, state of existence, of the interest group that they are representing. There were worries when leaders, when characters were initially announced that this could be too CK3, that the great man theory might be too big, and I understand those worries very, very well. But the way I read this is that we fundamentally are looking at leaders that are a result of the actual existence of that interest group, in which position the interest group is in, and so on, and then are simply depicting this onto a person. You can, for example, right, see a situation where the working class is in a terrible state, and a communist revolution could be achieved if only you had a successful leader, popular leader. If your leader turns out to be unpopular, you might have the idea that makes sense for that interest group in the moment, but can't do anything with it because he's looking at a situation where nobody actually believes him. So you do have the mix between the societal influence on the leaders and the leaders' charisma on this topic. So I really like that. I think that is a good idea. There's a lot of variety in this as well, and it achieves that basically every playthrough feels differently, because you're looking at a situation where you might get a different leader that has very different interests, or if he has the same interest as the leader in a different game, it might just be very much more popular or a lot less popular. Very cool stuff. Now, Mr. Marx here is one of several historical figures who have been lovingly sculpted by our artists. He can show up in your country shortly after researching socialism and may become the interest group leader for the trade unions. So this is Karl Heinrich Marx. I don't know what this is. I believe this... you know what I think this is? I think this is supposed to be this, except he probably didn't have anything set for it. Because this is really just to show off, you know, that Karl Marx is indeed pretty much with his likeness here in the game. Ultimately, quite funny that he, of course, stands in a palace here. But the point being that these personas, these personalities, they may pop up in historical and ahistorical places, depending on who researches what. But once you see them, you know, oh, okay, I might be in for some trouble here. Some characters have a specifically defined historical appearance, such as Mr. Marxial or the Kaiser above. We have a limited number of these on release, but we expect to continue adding more historical DNA to both characters present in the start date and characters who can emerge later in the game. Likewise, many countries, especially those we expect to be popular among players, have an historical set of starting interest group leaders and commanders, but not all. Once again, we expect to flesh this out further as we deep dive into particular regions post-release. Where historical characters have been defined, the game will generate a character with an appropriate ideology based on the factors described above. So, even if you don't have historically generated characters and leaders, you're looking at a situation where they are then generated anyway, based on the situation of the interest group and the country. And with that, you ultimately get appropriate leaders either way. I do want to point one thing out that I find quite funny. Once again, we expect to flesh this out further as we deep dive into particular regions post-release. This, to me, sounds like we might genuinely see the return to Crusader Kings 3's DLC model, which is flavor packs, so you get events, mechanics, and graphics and such that are specific to one region in the flavor pack, and then the expansion pack where we have something that really works worldwide, right? That is a mechanic that just generally is applicable, such as, for example, royal courts. One has to hope, of course, that the development cycle is a lot better than it went for CK3, but to be fair, they did go through 2020, 2021 there, meaning that they had a bit of a tough time, I think, as everybody did. But yeah, quite interesting. I think it's, you know, it's just an indicator, but for me, this definitely reads like somebody saying, we're gonna do deep dives in these regions similar to what CK3 is doing. Anyway, we can define everything that you would expect about a character, like their religion, ethnicity, and traits, but there's also a little more we can do here, taking US President Abraham Lincoln as an example. We set the earliest start date that he can become an interest group leader to 1847, when he first entered the House of Representatives, joining the national political stage. We can set both country level and interest group level triggers on when it's appropriate for a character to emerge. Lincoln can emerge only in the USA, and he can join either the intelligentsia or rural folk if they are not marginalized. We can also determine the chance that a politician will emerge every time a suitable interest group selects a new leader. So basically, you mark which tags they're eligible for, you mark which interest groups they're eligible for, and then in both of these steps individually you can mark when and why they're eligible for it, and then you can also check, you know, do they... Basically, when one of the existing interest groups leaders, when they phase out, do they have a chance to come in, and under which circumstances is this? This is not just very moddable, this is incredibly flexible. Like, it's very flexible even for the devs themselves. I'm very, very excited for this, because it's, you can, you know, if you, let's say you dislike, for example, the way a certain character that is historical has been scripted to potentially spawn, you can change that in a heartbeat. So easy. Very excited to see that, because as much as these systems obviously should work exactly the way I envision this, well, anybody envisions this, right? I think that you will always have a situation where oftentimes people will disagree on when and why and how somebody should emerge, and with this system, it can be altered incredibly quickly. Very, very nice. Santa Anna's political and military career is as long as it is fascinating. The day he was captured by the Texan army, however, was not one of his best days. Should this happen in Victoria 3, Mexico will be forced to capitulate and recognize Texan independence. Antonio Lope de Santa Anna, I sadly do not speak Spanish. He is a general, as you can see. He's a politician and a general. He is the leader of the armed forces. His ideology is moderate. He is Catholic. You know, it actually makes me think. I think for Catholic and for the religious icons, it might be nice if you had a... Maybe that's just an old symbol. I'm mostly coming in from the angle that it would be nicer if this was embedded in a circle, because that would make it much more visible. This is a very intricate symbol, especially in comparison to the others here. It would be nice, I think, if this was framed a bit. Anyway, popularity is neutral, so he's not actually that bad, and his age is 48. He's also an ambitious man. That is a good lead, honestly. I think you could play a pretty good Mexican campaign. Let's assume you play Mexico. Let's assume that Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna actually wins the war against Texas. He becomes an accomplished general. He might gain popularity. All of a sudden, the armed forces go even higher. You could have a very, very stable monarchy / if you wanted to, military dictatorship under these circumstances. Man, yeah, he straight up just has a good perk. We have him right here, and he, you know, has psychological affliction and whatnot, and he is arrogant. I think I would love to play Mexico under these circumstances. Seems like you have an alley to greatness basically right here. Now, every character has one or more roles that determine their impact on your nation. Characters can sometimes have multiple roles. For instance, it is possible to grant command to your monarchs and dictators, giving them the ability to command your armed forces personally. Characters can have the following roles. Let's take a look. Rulers. The king, the president, the pope, the head honcho of the nation. Who rules a country is determined by a governance principles law. Heirs. Heirs exist only in monarchies and primarily spend their time waiting for mummy or daddy to pop off so they can have their turn on the throne. It is nice that it is tracked, but of course it has to be said there isn't really much tracking at all when it comes to royal families, when it comes to heirs. It's nice that they're tracked, that you know what is coming next, so that you have something that you can foresee, but I wish they would put some more into this that you can do with heirs, that they can interact with other heirs, for example. But that is something, of course, that wasn't all that prevalent in this period, when at least it comes to the comparative analysis here with, for example, CK3 or EU4, the dynasties were much, much more important in those areas, although, of course, they are still quite important right here as well. Politicians. These are interest group leaders whose ideologies are a huge determining factor for the laws you can pass and the political movements that will emerge. And then, last but not least, commanders. Your generals and admirals heroically, or not so heroically, leading your forces into battle. And then right here, a charismatic interest group leader can provide a very large boost to their IG's pop attraction, which if you want to empower the IG can be a powerful advantage in realizing your ambitions. If the charismatic leader is a member of an IG you are not so keen on, however, they may become a painful thorn in your side. And this is exactly what I mean. If you have a Russia playthrough, for example, where you say I want to stay Tsarist, you are looking at a situation where you have to hope that the industrialists and the intelligentsia do not get leaders that are, you know, popular enough to lift up the IGs that they lead and basically either cost you even more in your suppression budget or in your payment, for example, the poor, or in, you know, certain laws that you need to change, making the IGs that you do care for unhappy with you. You need to make some opportunity cost decisions there, but if you get lucky and you don't have them at all, you might have an easier path. I like this approach because it throws challenges at you that you can't foresee. You're looking at this and you say, okay, the next 10 years are going to be difficult because they have a leader that can actually throw a wrench into my plans. Big fan of the way they integrated these characters because they are results of the society, but then individually will heavily impact what the opportunity cost decisions look like. This, for example, is charismatic, plus 50 popularity straight, that is pretty big. As a ruler, 5% additional influence, and as interest group leader, which this character does not appear to be, I think. Does it mean he's just a ruler, or is he an heir here? Then again, it's just a trait overview anyway. Plus 20% interest group pop attraction. My god, this guy can pull in people. As a commander, inactive, plus 10% morale recovery. This character has natural communication skills. That guy in an opposition party or in an opposition interest group can ruin your life. This guy, in an interest group that you care for, can make everything so much more easily. And that is exactly the random factor that should be applied to interest groups after, you know, of course you have the very economic, very grounded sort of approach as far as the support of pops is concerned. Each character also has character traits. Traits have a variety of effects, and these effects can differ depending on the character's roles. Let's take a look at the cruel trait. A cruel character takes a very substantial hit to their popularity. More on that just in a bit, but the other effects are applied depending on the character's role. A cruel commander will encourage his focus to cause more casualties to the enemy and more devastation in the course of the war. In an IG as a cruel leader, they will gain more approval for being included in the government. Finally, a cruel ruler enjoys cheaper decrees. Violent suppression might be a favorite, but opposition IGs will more readily disapprove of the government, and all pops in the nation will have reduced standard of living. Other traits include ambitious, pillager, innovative, and of course opium addict. As you can see, a lot of variance in that, and a lot of decision-making processes triggered by that. Big fan. Seriously, I can't understate how much I was worried that characters could have the exact wrong impact, where they largely basically are something that you then have to be complacent around, or, you know, that you have to deal with individually, but instead they will change the IG game, they will change the societal game, they will have an impact on your pops. Big fan the way this turned out here. A character's virtues and vices may impact their popularity. Mr. Pretorius here has many fine qualities, but his relationship with cocaine has caused his otherwise stellar reputation to take a hit. Andreas Pretorius has neutral plus 25 popularity. He's direct, he's an experienced diplomat, and he's a cocaine addict. Well, I mean, he's trying. Now, popularity is a measure of a character's reputation among the people of the nation. It comes primarily from their traits, but many events will cause characters to rise and fall in the arena of public opinion. Like traits, the effects of a character's popularity depends on their roles. For the ruler, popularity adds legitimacy to the government. Popularity of interest group leaders affects the attractiveness of their IG to pops, and is a contributing factor to momentum in elections. Finally, combat units will regain their morale faster or slower depending on the popularity of their commander. So sometimes you might not want to put your great, very popular general onto a front line, because it would make him too renowned, too popular, and he would all of a sudden go out of his way and lead an interest group to greatness that you didn't really want to be great. Characters play an important role in Victoria 3. They rule nations, dominate internal politics, and command armies. Through their ideologies, new and old ideas clash in the arena of government and public opinion, while their traits will help or hinder their goals as well as yours. I really like what they've done here. Characters are generated as the ideological result of the existence of the very state of existence of the interest groups and the country, meaning they are a direct result from this. And then these characters have a chance to make it easier or harder to push something through. Let's say you have a great, you want to become a socialist, for example, or you want to become fascist. You have a party leader that has adopted this ideology, but everybody hates him. Good luck doing that. You might still try, but instead of actually doing it as a, peaceful takeover, you might have to do it in a civil war. And these are the sort of differences I think that are very important to see, because you have to bide your time. You have to find other alleyways to make it more likely that your revolution, one way or another, will succeed by, for example, impovering certain people that will then join this revolution. I think that the combination of the genuine societal scale here, with a scale where individuals sometimes can be a lucky draw or a very unlucky draw, is absolutely excellent. I'm a big fan of this. The implementation ultimately turns out in a way where I think the characters never seem to be getting in your way. Where you look at an angle where, previously it may have been, there may have been a bit of a fear here that characters can overshadow the actual interest groups and their pops. I don't think that is the case at all, because they are strictly the result of those pops and those interest groups and what is happening in the country. Big fan. Seriously, I actually think this is one of those things where I like the way that they implemented this, and I think it is a worthwhile addition, which was always somewhat questionable, I think, for Victoria 3, because they went much further than Victoria 2 did with characters. But I personally would definitely say it is worth it, and you can see this in the AARs. We're going to talk about the Ethiopian AAR, I believe, tomorrow. And you can see it there in Japan and Ethiopia, because it matters so much which character you get, but ultimately you always have other alleyways to go in. It just adds an additional challenge or sometimes an additional boon. That is a nice implementation. Next week, super important dev diary, revisions to the trade mechanics. That is something that I'm very eager for. I really want to see the complete explanation of this, and I will see you then. Later, alligator.